When historians detail the greatest Army leaders of World War II, several prominent names come to mind. General George S. Patton, General George C. Marshall, General Omar Bradley. These officers oversaw extensive campaigns and helped the Allies overcome the odds in numerous battles. They are studied in textbooks around the world as top generals and leaders. But another officer from that time has had perhaps even more influence in the 75-plus years since then. And though his name doesn't appear in the books, he literally wrote and edited the books, ones that are still studied to this day by soldiers and officers around the world. His name was Major General Edwin Forrest Harding. Harding graduated from West Point in 1909 alongside Patton and deployed to the Philippines, the Mexican border, and China over his first 2 decades of service. During this time, his proficiency with math and the ability to quote T.S. Eliot and Rudyard Kipling became well known. His former classmates even referred to him as the Army's poet laureate. And in 1934, he received perhaps his most important assignment: to share new ideas on how to organize infantry in battle across the entire Army. Leaders could sense that another war was on the horizon and turned to his intellect to lay out new schemes. And he thrived in that role. He turned Infantry Journal from a publication printing dry, boring lectures into something featuring cutting-edge analysis and topics. Concurrently, he edited the monumental textbook Infantry in Battle, which quickly became a must-read for officers across the country and is still studied to this day. His publications formed the templates for battle across the world and increased communication amongst all Army divisions. Without him, it could be argued that the Allies may not have won the war. It is only fitting that today, when global conflicts are evolving and changing, the U.S. Army has taken a page from its past and is in the process of revitalizing and modernizing its journals and communications. And what is this initiative's name? The Harding Project. In today's episode, our hosts sit down with Lieutenant Colonel Zach Griffiths and Sergeant First Class Leyton Summerlin, the 2 individuals who are overseeing the Harding Project. They chat about their own calls to service, the goals and future of the initiative, and try to figure out what the word triskaidekaphobia actually means. I'm Carrie Viro-Heikis, and this is Army Matters.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Army Matters. I'm your co-host, the 15th Sergeant of the Army retired, Dan Dailey, and I'm here with my good friend,
Lieutenant General retired Leslie C. Smith, the 66th Inspector General of the Army, and I'm the other co-host with Daniel A. Dailey.
Wow, thank you, sir.
You're welcome, sir. How are you today?
I'm doing good. Good. It's good for us to both be back. You know, I was gone, and you were gone. And
doing our thing.
Yeah, we can't let that happen anymore.
It's just life. That's just the way it is.
Yeah. Would you consider yourself to be a big reader?
I would say an average reader. I don't read as much now as I used to, but sometimes I get into the mode if I want to read. I have like 6 books on my nightstand. So
a guy that reads every day would be a 10, and someone like me who never reads a book is a 1. Where are you at?
You're not. You read books. I'm saying I'm probably about a 6 or a 7.
Oh, that's a pretty big reader. Yeah.
Are you a big reader?
No, I'm not.
No? Why not?
You know, I don't know. I enjoy it when I do it, right? But I have to be, because you have your time, right?
Yes.
And then you figure out what's most important to me.
Yes.
So when I have free time,
right,
that's when I would read if I've read more. I read on airplanes.
Yes.
I read a lot on airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
But when I have free time, I do things with my hands.
Things.
Yeah.
You mean like making beer?
Making beer, raising bees, my woodworking. And so I would...
You raise bees? You're a beekeeper?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know why we're talking about all this?
Why?
Well, have you heard of the Harding Project?
Of course I have.
So, Les, recently I got to sit down with these two very intelligent soldiers, Lieutenant Colonel Griffiths and a Sergeant First Class Summerlin.
Okay.
And we're going to learn all about what they're going to do to bring reading back to the eyes of soldiers.
Reading and writing.
And writing. That's right.
Yes.
Because you got to write before you can read.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. It talks about.
It's kind of like the egg or the chicken or the smoke or the
chicken
fire.
and the egg. Yeah, which came
Definitely,
first?
you got right first, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Definitely got right first. Yeah.
Let's go ahead and listen to the episode with our two great guests.
We should. Oh, yes. The episode that I did while you were hanging out on the beach, drinking those drinks with the umbrellas.
What? How do you know about that?
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to Lieutenant Colonel Zach Griffiths and Sergeant First Class Leyton Summerlin. Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Really good. Thanks for having us on, Dan.
Yeah, appreciate it.
So let's start off, we'd like to let the listeners know who's on the show. Let's learn a little bit about you guys. So, Zach, let's start with you. Where are you at right now, by the way? And tell us a little background story about yourself.
Yeah, so Dan, I'm Colonel Zach Griffiths. I am in Lexington, Massachusetts. It's my hometown and where the revolution started. I had a chance to run by Lexington Green yesterday, saw Captain John Parker in his line, "If they mean to have a war, let it begin here." So it's always nice to be home.
Very cool. Lexington and Concord. Wow. So you're like a stone throw away from the very beginnings of this first skirmish in the Army, huh?
That's right. It's right here, and you can actually see where the Minutemen came out of Monroe Tavern. There's a shot fired on the green. Every April, they reenact it. And actually coming up on 250, because 1775, right, is the first battle, Lexington and Concord. So it's a really cool place to be from, and a need to be home for a little bit this summer.
Excellent. And Leyton, how about you?
Yeah, so my name's Sergeant First Class Leyton Summerlin. Originally from California, currently in Fort Novacell. We are on a roadshow right now, going around talking to soldiers about the Harding Project and upcoming opportunities. Infantryman by trade.
Now that's the best flavor of soldier right there. Infantryman by trade. So since we're talking about the power of the written word today, I figured we'd start off with a question about words. What's your favorite or least favorite word, gentlemen?
Alliteration is my favorite word.
What the heck is that?
It's when you say a word like where you use the same word multiple times in a row.
Oh, I do that a lot.
The snake slithered.
Yeah, the snake slithered. And I just think it's a good word. And I love to type and write and use alliteration. Yeah, the snake slithered sneakily, things like that. Where you get this S
like
sound.
Seven swans silently sailed seaward?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
wow.
like good like S sound.
I just made that up.
Yeah, you're made.
Oh, nice. Natural.
I don't know why you hire a creative writer.
Can I get on the team or what? Am I in? All right, Leyton, over to you.
I'm not a big alliteration guy.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I have a favorite word, but my least favorite words are the ones that I find myself using way too often. It's the word just and the word that. They are so prominent in my personal lexicon that I overuse them so much. So when I write anything, I have to Control F, look for them because they will be all over the place. And then 99% of them I can delete. So my least favorite words.
I don't know what to make of that, but we'll
You got us like in a writing frame of mind. As I think about it, like is alliteration my favorite word? No, probably not. But that's the one that just popped in my mind.
Right.
So what about you, Sergeant Major?
Yeah.
Like, what are your favorite
what's your,
word?
what's your favorite word?
my favorite word?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. When I was the SMA, I had this thing that I did with my public affairs team is that anytime I sent something out to the force, we would evaluate every word as positive, negative, or neutral. And I never wanted negative things to go out. And it was easy. You can just literally do it when you write, right? So, the word sharp. Mm-hmm. Is that positive or negative? Sharp to me is a negative word, right? So
probably has more of a negative context.
Yeah. So I don't necessarily have a favorite word I do. I do have a favorite word. Triskaidekaphobia. Ooh, love that word.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah. Well, back in the early days, we used to name our vehicles, and mine was Bravo 1-3, right? And we people put killer or, destroyer, and I put Triskaidekaphobia on my Bradley, right? And people all the time would go, what the heck is Triskaidekaphobia? It's the fear of the number 13. Hey, let's dig into the Army story. We got two soldiers on the show. And my favorite question is, and we'll start with you, Zach. What drew you to the Army? Why the United States Army? Why a soldier?
I sometimes struggle with this question because I don't know totally why. There was no military in my family, so I'm kind of just someone who came from the outside.
Yeah.
When I told my parents I wanted to go to West Point, they were supportive, but asked why. Mm-hmm. They said, well, do you want to be a forester? You'd be outside. And I was like, no, that's not it. Forestry, yeah, that's a great profession, but that's not it.
Yeah.
I think it was like my time in the Boy Scouts, really,
yeah,
that brought me to just wanting to be outside, lead.
Excellent.
I saw a path in my life where I was just going to work in an office. And the joke I make is that as an officer, I primarily do work in an office, but at least I've gotten outside some, where I get to lead troops in the infantry and then the special forces, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. It's been a great path, and really glad I went to West Point and have been in the Army since. Yeah,
that's awesome. I mean, you live in Lexington, Concord. You're probably out there playing Army every day or something too, I'm sure, right?
That's right.
No. Yeah,
that's right.
All right. What was the moment that you realized that you love serving the Army? That, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life?
Yeah, Dan, when I was a Special Forces officer in Afghanistan, we were about 2 months into our 8-month deployment, and my partners got sent out on their own operation, got in a terrible ambush. Of the 40 that went out, 13 were killed. Mm. And it was very traumatic for my Afghan partners. And to the point where the Special Operations Task Force I was with, our battalion, said, hey, I think we're just going to send you guys home. Like, we think your mission's over. Your partner's facing desertion. They lost all this equipment. And I fought, and my team sergeant and my warrant, we fought to put those guys back together. And so we were able to, reconstitute them as a force, get them recognized for their loss, get some money to the families, get replacement soldiers in. 6 weeks later, we had them arresting an insurgent financier nearby. That's a pretty quick turn from desertion and refusing to leave the base to being like having effects in the province. And then by the time we left about 6 months later, they were doing unilateral operations to pull weapons out of weapons caches that they had found on their own intelligence. And so this whole experience, while very tragic for my partners, led me to believe that the Army Special Forces had a tremendous impact. And it was something I wanted to keep being part of. And so then, I stayed, and continues to motivate my continued service.
So Zach, you mentioned several times Special Forces officer, but during one point in your career, you oversaw a diving team during some of that period. And you also oversaw the training of it. Tell us about that.
I had the great fortune to be placed onto a Special Forces dive team. And for those, who don't know, those teams are exceptional because the soldiers that are on them have to volunteer to go to what's thought to be one of the hardest schools in the Army, which is the Combat Divers Qualification Course. But then when I was teaching at West Point, I had the opportunity to train the cadet combat divers there. And that was a terrific opportunity to really get to mentor some really fantastic cadets. We sent about 10 or 13 each year, had like an 80-90% graduation rate. And so, that process of training those cadets really helped me understand the diving program better, but also get to show them what right looked like. That training is so dangerous, right? There's breathing, and there's people that have heart issues, all these things really make that course high risk. And so I was able to bring that experience back and teach the cadets such that when they went out as infantry platoon leaders or whatever they did in the Army, they could bring a really great approach to managing risk and doing tough, realistic training. And that experience actually led me partly to the Harding Project, because I tried to write an article about how great these cadets were for the SF regiment. And ultimately, it wasn't able to get published. And so that led to some frustration on me look into the magazine. So if you're ever looking for a great soldier, look for someone with a bubble. And then it did lead me to kind of this work we're doing now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We call it scuba. You get the scuba badge.
Scuba.
Right? They're hard to get. They are hard to get. So you mentioned several times, obviously, our listeners heard that you went to West Point, and now you went back there to teach, right? And I feel the same way you do. The last several years, I go up and teach at the Summerlin Center for Ethics and enjoy my time up there because those cadets are like sponges. I mean, they're just amazing. But what did you see in the difference from the time you went back to teach from the time that you were a cadet yourself and how cadets are?
I think there's two big differences. The first is really visual, which is the smartphone, right? When I was a cadet, phones were new. Smartphones came out the year I graduated, I think. If you had a phone, it had to be locked in your room. When I come back, not not walking around, but before class, there's the scrolling soldier, right? The Sergeant Summerlin. I talk about this all the time. They're on their phones. They're disciplined. So that's visual. The part that was more culturally different, I thought was an awesome improvement, was just how normalized it was for women to branch into the combat arms. When I was a cadet, it was kind of unthinkable, right, for a female cadet to branch into the infantry or the field artillery. But by the time I was back on faculty, that was something that was normal. And they say, oh, yeah, she's going to branch infantry. Oh, and the cadets would be talking about the opportunities. Oh, I think the field artillery is a good choice for me, or the armor branch. And so it struck me because it was impossible when I was a cadet, to the point where it's just totally normal about 10 years later.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with the cell phone thing, too. That's the biggest anxiety I think this generation has. If you remove that thing from them, this generation that grew up today has had the world's information in the palm of their hands, available in a microsecond since birth. And I used to go to a place like a library and do a book report on a book that was 30 years old. So who's the smarter people? Right? They are. They are.
Yeah.
Leyton, let's jump over to you, buddy. Now, you have a long military lineage in your family. Tell us that story.
Yeah. So on my dad's side, we have a very large military family, mostly Army. Outside of that, it's really just the Air Force, but it dates back to Defender at the Alamo, A. Spain Summerlin.
Yeah.
I think it runs in our blood. Like, there's just kind of this weird call to service. So my mom would tell you that since I was 2, I've known that I was going to be in the Army. My dad was a big part of that. I always remember, he was like this G.I. Joe to me. He would come home every now and then, and it was always great. But all his siblings were military, whether it was Army or Air Force. And, his stepdad was infantry officer in Vietnam, and my great-grandfather was in World War II. He was in the Air Corps. Just a pretty long lineage there.
Yeah. I come from a long lineage of folks that served. Of course, in my family, I was the only one that ever stayed. So, Leyton, what was the moment that made you realize you wanted to stay? I mean, that point in your career where you said, you know what? I think I'm going to do this for a while.
So when I came back from Afghanistan, I actually wanted to get out. But then I met my wife while I was stationed in Hohenfels, Germany, and that was a huge turning moment. And I don't know. I think I was reminded how much I wanted to be in the Army, and so I knew I was going to do it for a long time.
My thought process is if you don't do 30, you're a quitter.
Right. Yeah. Well, I told my wife the other day that I got 27 years left, and she was like,
That's
"Okay."
Right. Yeah. Every time I talk to soldiers, I say, "How much time of service you got? 3-4 years." I say, "Well, I got 26 left."
Right. That's it. Yeah.
How many years did you do, Sergeant Major?
I did 30. But they kicked me out.
Yeah.
Right.
I found the end of the Army career. I found the end. I would have stayed. I would have loved to stay. I'd still be in the Army if I could. I thoroughly enjoyed it and loved every minute of it and miss every minute of it too.
Yeah, that's right.
So, Leyton, you described you had a few issues and maybe some trials and tribulations in English class, but then you joined the Army, and look where it's brought you today. Now you're part of the Harding Project. Can you tell us about that journey?
Well, you put me on the spot, Sergeant Major, because in high school, I did not do well, as most of my NCO brethren would probably relate to. The joke I always make is that it's weird for me to be here on the Harding Project with Colonel Griffiths because I barely passed high school. I failed junior English twice, and I lied and cheated out of every reading and writing assignment I had. And now I'm like a labeled writer. So it's pretty interesting.
I think you're the first person on the show that openly admitted you cheated your way through high school. That is pretty,
I'm radically transparent. So
yeah.
Hey, okay.
I don't know what the statute of limitations is on that kind of stuff, but if some of your high school teachers are listening, I think they're going to be a little upset. Or maybe they knew. I don't know.
They probably knew. I think they just didn't want to deal with me for another year. So
hopefully they'd be proud of him now, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's going a long way.
You turned out all right. So one interesting question, too, reading through your career highlights. You had a task as a soldier of stealing vehicles. Now, this is interesting. So share with our listeners, what was that all about first, and what did you learn from that experience?
So That was from my time in Hohenfels when I was an Op 4 soldier with 1-4 Infantry. And so I was in the scout platoon, and we were very fortunate to play 2 different roles in the date rotations. And one of them was the long-range surveillance, but then the other half of that was we got to play the Special Purpose Forces, which is supposed to represent a Tier 2 version of Lieutenant Colonel Griffiths. Knowing him now, I don't know if we ever even came close to that, but what the mission ultimately was to go into their support zones and cause as much disruption as possible. And I was very fortunate to have leaders who gave us a lot of left and right latitude, free reign, and so much to the point where sometimes we'd be overly aggressive. But yeah, so a lot of what that boiled down to was, taking 3 to 4 guys, maybe 5 guys, and killing and capturing as much as you could within their support zone. And that often turned into stealing as many first arms as you can, or as many, young captains who got put on guard duty and fell asleep because, because
that's what captains do on guard duty.
Surprisingly enough, they do it more than the average, maybe sergeant or specialist. But that's where that comes from. It's we stole a lot of people, stole a lot of things.
Support your local U.S. Army by joining the AUSA Community Partners Program. As a partner, you'll honor those who protect our freedoms, connect with local Army leaders, and participate in community events. Enjoy exclusive benefits like discounts on event registrations, hotels, car rentals, and more. Show your support and grow your business network with AUSA. Call 703-907-2414. That's 703-907-2414 to join today. Interested in a career in STEM, digital technology, education, security and intelligence, logistics, medical, and more? Does the $50,000 signing bonus, free healthcare for you and your dependents, fully covered college tuition, and free housing sound promising? Attend the Total Army Career Fair on September 6th and 7th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. each day at the NGR Stadium in Houston, Texas. This fair is free and open to the public and will offer active Army and part-time Army roles, as well as full-time Army civilian positions. For more information, go to apply.army.mil. That's apply.army.mil.
Welcome back to Army Matters. Gentlemen, can you tell us who the Harding Project is actually named for and the story behind why they named it after him?
Yeah, so we named the Harding Project not for the former President Harding, but for Edwin Forrest Harding, who as a major renewed 2 Army journals in the 1930s. And he, in 1930, under then Colonel Bradley, was put in charge of the military history section they had down there at the infantry school. And one of his jobs was to fix what was then called mailing list. It's now called infantry. It used to just be kind of a collection of random lectures that they had typed up, but he turned it into a bunch of narratives and good articles that went out to help educate the whole Army on how the Army was changing, how the infantry was changing, but also especially the reserve component and getting those lessons out to them, trying to standardize the Army in kind of the early 20th century. And then after he finished the War College, the Chief of Infantry, Major General Kraft, tasked him to become the editor of the Infantry Journal, which actually is now Army. So he's got a connection with AUSA. Mm-hmm. Again, took it from kind of I think it was called like the Trade Journal of Company Commanders into something that's much more dynamic. So he took that took that journal to a place where the subscribers doubled or tripled in just a couple of years, because he went from very boring, bland content to making something dynamic that people wanted to read and wanted to engage with. And so this double trick he pulled off during an important time in U.S. Army when there was no money, but they knew war was coming. is the thing that kind of made me pick him as the namesake for our effort today, as we think about how can the Army in this period of transition, think harder about the future, share lessons laterally, and can link leaders, to win future wars.
So what's the origins of the modern day Harding Project, and how did each of you get here?
So today's Harding Project comes out of kind of several years of work I did, just try and assess how the Army's journals were doing. I mentioned earlier that I had been frustrated with Special Warfare Magazine, which is the journal of the Special Warfare Center in school. And so I wrote a report about how I thought it could get better. It got some traction, but there was some leader turnover. I deployed to Iraq, and then I became a White House fellow, so I didn't have a lot of time to kind of push hard on it. But I did think hey, maybe this isn't just a special forces problem or a special operations problem, but it's an Army problem. And so I looked kind of more broadly, and it seemed like all the journals were kind of hurting. They had stopped printing, but they weren't really adapted for the scrolling soldier that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
They were big 10 megabyte PDFs that you had to download and then pinch and zoom on your phone to get. There's just no evidence that we were thinking hard or these were good outlets. But at the same time, I saw that outlets like the Modern War Institute or War on the Rocks exploded with similar content and had great engagement. And so it just seemed like there was an opportunity there. So I did some work on that over time, and eventually this culminated in an article I wrote for Modern War Institute in April of 23.
Now, Zach, you said you did some work. Were you assigned to do this work, or you just said, what?
I just did it.
Hey, in my spare time, I'm going to fix an Army program.
One of the big things that I wanted, I hope the Harding Project inspires in people, is a sense that they have professional agency. Right.
Yeah.
To Sergeant Summerlin's point where he's like, hey, I had a daughter and I realized I want to make the Army as good as I can.
Yeah.
Right. That's what, the journals help us do that by letting.
I'm a little different for someone. He couldn't read or write prior to having that. And he realized he had a child and had to grow up. And But
so his accomplishment, all the more impressive, I think. Right. Because he had to start from, a different level. So in any event, no one tasked me to do this. Right. But I just saw that there was this problem. I wrote about it. It got to General George through a friend of mine who knew him. And then I got a call as soon as I got back to my office to say, hey, you need to report to General George's office in an hour. And so I thought I was getting either yelled at or something. I didn't know. But then he called me in and said, hey, tell me about the Army's journals. And so we sat down, talked about them, and he said, hey, I'd like to make this happen. He pulled me up onto his personal staff where I was leading the Harding Project. And I had found Sergeant Summerlin's article that he wrote in Infantry. So maybe we could turn over to him, have him talk about that article. And I don't know his experience, how he got pulled up to work on it.
When I was a drill sergeant, my daughter was born. I kicked everything into high gear. I wanted to help the Army because I knew that here in 18 years she was going to join. I was able to develop a leadership class that was tailored to drill sergeants that was about 3 days long. It shaped and it morphed, and eventually it stopped evolving, and that was kind of how I knew that we were on to something good here. At the end of it, I was told that I need to put it in writing because I did the entire class on a whiteboard. I was not a writer, like we said before. I had just recently got into reading. You were not about to get me to try to write this class out. But they made a very compelling point that if I wanted to hand it over properly to the next drill sergeant of the year, then it has to be something tangible. And so they both pushed me pretty hard to get it written. My wife, bless her soul, she put up with me while I locked myself in a room and put pen to paper, got it all written. So me growing up in the Army, lightly reading the Infantry magazine and that article that I told you about from Armor, it gave me this idea that maybe I can take this down to the Infantry magazine and see if they would publish it. And my hope was that maybe over the next 5 years, over the next 20 years or so, maybe 5 people would read it. And maybe I could help 5 people the same way that article that I mentioned before has helped me ever since. So I worked with the editor there, and she helped me get it published. And then I get this phone call from Major so-and-so from the Chief of Staff of the Army's office. And he's like, hey, do you have a minute? And I just remember thinking, I was like, am I in trouble? Because I have a lot going on right now. And if you say yes, we're going to have to do this later.
Yeah.
And he laughed about it, and he said, no, hey, I read your article. Sergeant Major Weimer read your article. General George read it. They, we're starting up the Harding Project. And They liked what you had to say. He told me a little bit about what was going on and what the mission was, asked me if I want to be on the team, and I said yes.
So, gentlemen, what's the intent? What are we trying to achieve with the Harding Project? What is the Chief's guidance to you?
So SMA, what we're trying to do is just renew the Army's journals and with a special focus on getting NCOs into writing in kind of a new way. What that means in practice is that we are about to launch a new website at the end of September called The Line of Departure that's going to have all of the Army's 11 branch journals side by side in a format that is web first, mobile friendly, and really just accessible, right? So when that E5 is in line at the shopette, picking up his lunch or whatever, he can look down on his phone and he sees on X or Instagram a new article. He can click on it and read it in a format that's really accessible. So that's the biggest focus. The second is also on just trying to make sure that these journals are staffed appropriately. About 40 years ago, they each had a staff of like 5 to 7 people. And today it's like 0, 1, or 2. And so we've already put 12 fellows at 11 journals who are people that have just come from the operating force, right? So these are like, a sergeant first class who's a special forces medical sergeant, or it's a recent company commander of a signal company who's going to lead the signal or Army communicator. And so these folks, know what's important to their communities and make sure we produce quality content that's coming from the field and it's what the field needs. We're also looking back at the archives because there's some great insights from journals like Armor that go all the way back to cavalry in 1888. And so one of the efforts is just to split all these old journals into articles, enrich them with metadata so you can search and find them, right? Because as you know, Army problems really don't change. It's people, it's equipment, it's fielding stuff, right? And so we want to drive insights from those.
Yeah.
And then the last area is on education. But probably the goal there is to make sure everyone knows the Army has these journals, because I think right now not everyone knows they do, and then how they can participate.
One last question for each of you. What do you think is the most influential piece of writing in the Army's history? Leyton.
Was not prepared for that.
Do the article and parameters.
I know, but that is such a contentious piece.
That's okay. We like tension in here.
Summary to the Army, Dailey. One of the most influential pieces in the Army's history that comes to my mind is in 1988, there was an article written in Parameters Quarterly called The Army's Command Sergeant Major Problem. Ooh. And it's kind of dually contentious because of the name in particular, but then it was also written by officers. So anytime I share this with somebody, they say, well, what do they know?
Yeah.
Another aspect of that is the time frame. Like I said, it was written in 88. So
there was a book written about this too, actually.
Was it really?
Yeah. A friend of mine, a retired colonel, just told me about it. He gave me the name.
Oh, I'll have to get it from you later. Yeah.
Yeah.
For myself, that was a incredibly influential piece from the Army's history, just because I have used it several times over as a primary source content for talking about what good leadership looks like for NCOs. How is it different from then? Now, put yourself in that time frame. Those kinds of things.
Excellent. I really thought you were going to talk about one of the pieces I wrote for Infantry Magazine or something like that, but obviously I didn't inspire. I didn't motivate and inspire. Zach, how about you? What is the most influential?
That is a tough question. I really admire General Donald Starry, who was, I think, the 3rd commander of TRADOC.
Yeah.
He wrote a number of pieces that are really good, but Extending the Battlefield is kind of a classic. It's where he laid out the logic behind air-land battle. Mm-hmm. And I just think anything you can read by Donald Starry, the prose is super good. He makes points very clearly and shows the way the Army's, in that point is going to change, and kind of invites folks along the journey to help and contribute. And so, that one's in Military Review, I think early 80s. It's definitely one worth reading.
I got to share with you guys, so I was coming from TRADOC Sergeant Major and becoming the SMA. I was intimately involved in changing all of our non-commissioned officer education. We rewrote the entire thing, right? And I was highly invested in this. And I was writing articles with my team down there to try to get our NCOs invested in education and reading and all the other stuff. And I used to tell people all the time, I changed the tattoo policy, and overnight it was the #1 selling Army Times magazine article, right, in history. 8 million hits in like 12 hours or something. I write a piece on leadership, it gets 3 hits in 6 months. It's like Gentlemen, thanks for being on the show today. And we're all in the boat rowing with you to help the chief get the word out about the Harding Project. And hopefully we get at least 3 out of 4 of our listeners will get the message.
Yeah. No, thank you. We appreciate it. We've had so much great support from AUSA, and it's a pleasure to do this podcast today. So thanks to you guys.
As you may already know, Army Matters is produced by the Association of the United States Army, which has 121 chapters worldwide. In today's chapter spotlight, we'd like to focus on an upcoming event that involves AUSA's president himself, General Robert B. Brown. On September 18th, the Arsenal of Democracy chapter will be hosting its annual Community Partner Luncheon and General Meeting at the War Memorial in Grosse Pointe Farms, Michigan. The event, attended by local community leaders, will recognize and award the Detroit Arsenal NCO of the Year, the National Guard Soldier of the Year, and the Volunteer Family of the Year. General Brown will be making an appearance to deliver a keynote address and to swear in the new executive board members. This event is a highlight of the chapter's year and will be very well attended. Congrats to Chapter President Charles Cogger and the entire Arsenal of Democracy team. If you or your chapter would like to be profiled on the show, please email us at podcast@ausa.org. Hooah.
To all our listeners, thanks for joining us. Army Matters is brought to you by the Association of the United States Army, the U.S. Army's professional association, member-supported, Army-connected. Visit us at ausa.org for more information or to become a member. Your membership helps AUSA continue to carry out its mission, educate, inform, and connect with the total Army, our industry partners, and supporters of a strong national defense. Today's episode was hosted by Lieutenant General retired Les Smith and SMA retired Dan Dailey, and anchor hosted by Carrie Barrow-Heckes. Anthony Del Call is the producer and writer, and Andy Bosnack is the supervising sound editor. Ellen Toner is the content editor. Unzinga Curry is the executive producer, and the senior producers are Carrie Barrow-Heckes and LaSharon Duncan. Be sure to subscribe to Army Matters wherever you get your podcasts, and please leave a review. As you know, we love seeing stars in the Army, especially if it comes in the form of a 5-star review. AUSA's Army Matters podcast can also be heard on Reach Across America Radio on Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern, on the iHeartRadio app, the Odyssey app, and the TuneIn app with the search of the word Reef. AUSA's Army Matters podcast primary purpose is to entertain. The podcast does not constitute advice or services. While guests are invited to listen, listeners, please note that you're not being provided professional advice from the podcast or the guest. The views and opinions of our guests do not necessarily reflect the views of AUSA. For questions or to provide topic recommendations, email us at podcast@ausa.org. I'm LaSharon Duncan. Hope you have a great Army Day. Hooah!